Wilson smashes into a speed bump at full speed, and thus the pitfalls of a lowered VW bus are once again brought to my attention. Hey there, my fellow VW enthusiasts. It's Joe and Wilson, my 67 tin top, homebrew, walkthrough, split window VW camper bus. And we are back once again on the Wilson the VW Bus podcast to talk to you with as little artificial intelligence assistance as possible. Just a good old-fashioned conversation between friends. You know, it's getting harder each episode to create content without the use of AI. It's creeping in everywhere, into the tools we podcasters use, into the photo editors, into the search engines and the operating systems. I'm not a big fan, just between the two of us, and I'm sure all the AI tools that are listening, but I will continue to try to do as much as I can without using AI, I promise. Now, let me take you back a bit, and let's talk about a recent show that we went to, and the issues that we had from the road. Wilson and I drove to the town of Denell, New Jersey, which is not too far, maybe a little over a half hour or so from my home, for their Hope for Paws Humane Society Hot Rod Fundraiser Car Show. It was an effort to help raise money for a local animal shelter that was damaged during the summer floods that we had here in our area in 2025. Now, unbeknownst to us, the town had a few hidden speed bumps on the road in this town, and, well, we hit one at about 25 miles per hour. It probably was marked, but I didn't see the sign, and, well, it may not seem like such a big deal to most of you, but driving a lowered vehicle and hitting the pavement or an obstacle is similar to, say, crashing into a brick wall. It's not fun. And immediately after the jarring hit, the passenger door on the bus flew open, the overhead lights popped out of their sockets, or the bulbs fell out of the sockets, the luggage roof on the rack almost went airborne, everything inside the bus that wasn't nailed down was sent flying, and I had to pull over and compose myself and then try to reassemble Wilson and all of our contents. When I got to the show a few minutes later and parked, I even noticed that my left corner Safari window latch had come apart. I occasionally drive with the Safari windows cracked about an inch or so, not fully open. It's well, technically it would be illegal in our state, but it's also too much wind. But cracking them about an inch works out real nice. So when I opened the window, when I parked, all of the pieces sort of fell out all over the place, and I thought this was it. They went flying everywhere. And I was sure this is going to be a nightmare to try to find them. So I started to look around for the parts and rebuild the window lock, the latch for the Safari window in the parking lot. I found the first little piece of the latch, which kind of fell off in my hand. But then the little button that pushes in and out, I found that like inside on the floor. I combed around on the ground and I found the little spring that I was missing. And the last little piece was this tiny little roll pin that was sitting right on the ledge of the windowsill, which I was sure I was never going to find that. It's like the size of a grain of rice. It is so small. But I did, and I found it, and I was able to take it all apart and put it back together in the parking lot, which I was surprised. Technically, the pin just sort of worked its way out, and then everything, once that pin's out, everything just sort of disassembles. But this was the final straw for me with Wilson being so low. I mean, it always looked nice. I got a lot of compliments, and people say, "Wow, that bus is really low," and it looked cool. But outside of the issue with Wilson smacking the pavement, I did enjoy the show, especially the food. I had great ribs there, and I got reacquainted with my old neighbor who lived down the street from where I grew up with my parents, and his beautiful blue '74 De Tomaso Pantera. Check out my Instagram post at Wilson the VW Bus if you want to see it. When I came home, I felt it necessary to examine Wilson for any potential damage from hitting the speed bump, and then look into raising up the front suspension. While I was under the bus, I noticed that Wilson's front tires were worn terribly on the inside, And that was no doubt that was because of riding so low and the camber on the tires. There was no tread left at all on the driver's side tire. They were completely bald and flat. Now, the original tires that I had on Wilson were 165/65 15s. So if you're not familiar, 165 is the overall size, 65 is the sidewall, and 15 is the rim. When I first started to drive Wilson during the first rebuild a few years ago, occasionally Wilson would get the front tire rubbing on top of the wheel well. So about 3 years ago, I made some changes and replaced those 65 series tires with a set of lower profile tires, 165/50 15s. Now this was during the pandemic manufacturing and rubber shortage of 2020, and thus the sizes for tires in 15-inch wheels was somewhat limited. Wilson has been riding low, very low, since then. To be honest with you, I think that the adjustable front beams might have just slipped down on their own a little bit. I don't recall setting them that low, but it was pretty low. As a side note, I talked to a bunch of guys at Flanders at the show up there about their VW bus size tires, and a few of them were running the same 165/50 15s. Even a few guys were running 165/45 15s. But there isn't much sidewall at all on a 45 series tire, so I can imagine how poor the ride quality is and how much it suffers. So getting out of my driveway on 50s was not even possible without scraping my skid plate. By the way, if you want to see the size difference in wheels and/or tires, head on over to wheel-size.com. There you can virtually check the difference in all tires and get the dimensions of the sidewall, the tread width, the overall diameter, and even play around with backspacing sizes for wheels. And it's a very, very helpful site. That's www.wheel-size.com. Great site. Now, if you remember, I made a skid plate for the steering box under Wilson because the steering box is the lowest point under a VW bus, a split window bus that is. That skid plate has been saving Wilson from any serious damage over the past few years. But seeing the condition of the front tires now meant that I had to replace them immediately. I started calling on my local tire shops, but nobody carried or was able to get my 2 new front tires in the new size I was looking for, which was that 165/60 15. This new tire size would give me an additional 3/4 of an inch taller sidewall than what I was currently running with the 50s. Now, keep in mind, this is all happening about a week prior to the Flanders trip, and I was worried that I was pushing my luck trying to get to Flanders on these severely old, worn tires, but they didn't get here in time, and that wasn't going to keep me from going to Flanders, so I spent a few hours jacking Wilson up in the air and adjusting the front beam until I had raised up the front suspension about 3/4 inches as well from the size I was at, for the ride height I was at. Now, this would help at least a little. 2 days later, after my return from Flanders, I got a message that my tires were in, and so I went and picked them up, and I removed the front tires off the bus, and took them over to my friends, Bobby and Mark, at Advanced Auto up the street, and they were kind enough to mount the tires for me. I've been thinking about powder coating the wheels this winter, but after hearing some of the issues that other friends of mine had with their powder coated wheels, like the lug nuts not staying seated because they couldn't grip into the wheel, I decided to just touch up the wheels with a bit of paint. I had previously asked Dave, Wilson's owner prior to my purchase, what color that he had used on the stock wheels when I purchased Wilson. He told me that he just mixed something up and it was just some leftover paint that he had, but he should have written that recipe down because I've gotten a lot of compliments over the years on Wilson's wheel color. The wheels are sort of a bronze color paint, and they really complement Wilson's patina. When my buddy Mark mounted the new tires for me, he made a couple of little small chips on the wheels anyway, so it wasn't a big deal. It was time for a quick touch-up. I took one of the wheels to my local paint supply store and asked them to try to do their best and match up the color for me. But They say they needed a larger flat area to scan with their scanner, with the computer scanner, to match the color. And since the shape of the wheel didn't allow for that, they would have to try to color match it by eye. I said that was okay, and so I waited around the shop for a few minutes until they brought me back the wheel with a small dab of the new paint on it, and I gotta say it was a pretty good color match. When I got home, I simply borrowed one of my granddaughter's small paintbrushes from her toy kit and proceeded to touch up the wheels, all 4 of them, just for now. I'll probably dig out the sandblaster this winter and clean up the wheels real nice before giving them a coat of the new paint. While I'm at it, I think that I'll remove the hubcap retainer clips because I have no intention of installing any in the near future, and they're just sort of hanging out on the wheels and raising my drag coefficient and making a little noise. So if I decide that I need to fill in the small round holes from the clips where they're held onto the wheels, I might just use some rivets or get creative with maybe a small cap screw or something like that. I don't want to permanently weld up the mounting holes for the clips, though. I spent a few hours as I continued to adjust my front beam after I put the wheels on it, the nicely painted new wheels, or touched up, I should say. So I adjusted the front beam and was measuring the height of the bus from the ground to the jack points, and then the ground to the top of the wheel wells, and also from the ground to the bottom of the rockers, until I got Wilson nice and level on each side and from front to back, which is really what I wanted. I didn't want a raked look, or really, especially didn't want the front end to be higher than the back. I can't begin to tell you how much more enjoyable the ride is now that Wilson has these new tires and a decent working suspension. I have not hit the skid plate on anything in weeks, and my anxiety when driving is much less now. Switching gears here, I usually don't delve into the new news issues, but this one particular Volkswagen issue is something I thought I would share with you all. It deals with the new Volkswagen EV model that's being sold in the United Kingdom. If you haven't heard, the new Volkswagen, I guess their standard ID3 Pro or Pro S models, are sold with about 201 horsepower, but the car technically has a full 228 horsepower, and they want you to pay a monthly fee in order to access the power that's already in the vehicle, which this sort of, pay for, monthly payment subscription plan for things that you've already purchased. I mean, this is, to me, is just not right. It's a software upgrade, which can be done, I guess, over the air, so you don't have to bring it into the dealer, but they want to charge you about $22 US a month, or for a one-time fee of about $879 for a permanent unlock. And that increases both the horsepower and the torque, and it stays with the car, remains in the car if the car is sold, unlike some of the Tesla options, which are only for the current owner. So this sort of idea, to me, it seems like a cash grab. It's really, a software-based, option that you can simply do for someone who's purchased the car, but why would you charge people for something they've already purchased, right? I mean, I don't know. It's, to me, I know it's a common thing with a couple of cars. I think some of the German cars, like I believe BMW or Mercedes have, if you want to use, and I've heard some other, I think it was Toyota maybe, a recent car. If you want to use the heated seats, it's a monthly charge for that. If you want to use the navigation, there's a monthly charge for that. If you want to connect your own phone to your large screen in your new car, even for navigation or for music, a monthly charge is required. I mean, this is ridiculous. Purchase a car and enjoy the car, or you purchase an old car and don't worry about any of this stuff. Anyhow, that's getting off my soapbox. I just wanted to share that recent news that I had heard from friends of mine talking about new VWs. And everywhere I go with Wilson, at every show, every cruise night, at some point, someone always comes up to me and says, "Oh, have you seen the new VW bus?" Yeah, I've seen it, but it's an EV, and I am not really interested. Sorry. Maybe if they made that new VW bus in an air-cooled, then I'd definitely be interested. Well, I had planned to talk to you about all of my recent alternator pulley issues today, but looks like we're out of time, so I'll have to save that story for the next episode of Wilson the VW Bus. I'll talk to you soon.